everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Extra Shift. I'm Chris here, as always, with Brendan. How are we going?
Pretty good. Happy New Year. It's been a little while since we last recorded. It's episode 201. We made it over the hump.
We're back into the list of jerseys again. We're right back around to number one, folks.
We're back to the goalie numbers again at the start of the 100.
Yeah, we are back to George Vesna and Gump Worsley, folks.
Yeah.
So it is 201. 200, obviously, last episode. Thank you very much for the feedback on that too, and all the feedback we get. We really appreciate it. I decided to start a bit differently today, though, because normally we go through. Brendan puts the list up of all the jersey numbers, and we pick through the jersey numbers, and I tell you which is my favorite former staff member who's got a jersey, and I also tell you which is the San Jose Sharks legend, and we go through all of that, obviously, but not today, because today we're going to start something a bit different. We're still going to go back through those jersey numbers because they're always a bit interesting, and we've always got new people listening, and they've never heard them. So for those of you who have heard it now twice, congratulations, you're going to hear it a third time.
Impressive.
But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing trivia around the number, not 1, 201, 202, and so forth. And I'm not telling Brendan what the questions are. And this is legit. I have not told him what the question is.
I've got no idea, and I'm terrified.
You got no idea of what's about to happen to him. So here's my question for you, linked to the number 201. 2 players in NHL history are tied on 201 playoff points.
Oh, playoff
They
points.
both played for the same team.
Are they still playing?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. So 201 playoff points means like it limits the options because it means a lot of playoff runs because
you've got to have played a lot in the playoffs. So that's
if you're lucky, you're playing 20 plus games or whatever.
Just for everyone listening in, just to give you a bit of a scope, Wayne Gretzky has 382 playoff points.
Yeah.
He is by far and away the leader.
Yeah.
By almost 100 over second.
Well, I've got to go with Penguins because like they had that long playoff streak for a long period of time. Like there aren't too many teams that had like 10 plus seasons in the playoffs in that run. But I don't think that Crosby and Malkin are that close. But I mean, I don't know who else to go with apart from like I was gonna say something like Ovi and Backstrom or whatever, but Backstrom's not playing anymore.
I'm going to give you a slight hint.
Yeah.
And Tim's had a guess of Crosby and Stamkos, but as I said, they play on the same. They played on the same team.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to help you out very, very slightly here, Brendan, by saying that when you asked me, are they both still playing? I paused before I went. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So they're still on a roster or whatever.
So one of them is 100% still playing.
Yeah.
The other one is still playing.
Yeah. Look, I'm gonna go. My first instinct was Ovi and Backstrom. Is that right?
It is not correct. You should have stuck with your original concept.
Yeah.
Which was Penguins.
Yeah.
It's Crosby.
Yeah.
And who's a player who's never retiring officially?
Oh, Yager. He's on
Jaromir Jagr.
Wow. Okay.
Jagr and Crosby are both tied.
When I said still playing, I meant in the NHL, Chris. I meant in the NHL.
No. You didn't clarify that. If you clarified that, I would have given you the answer. But yes, so Sidney Crosby and Jaromir Jagr.
Now. I think now that you mention it, I think I do remember the point when he reached Jagr.
And by the way, just to they're not that close. Evgeny Malkin has 180 playoff points.
Yeah. I knew that he was close, but I knew that it wasn't neck and neck.
So, and yes, Tim, you can have half points for getting Crosby right. Well done.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, we're going to do one of these, and I'm not going to tell him where the stats are coming from.
My logic was solid.
Logic was sound. Like I thought you were going straight down the path.
A second guess. Yeah.
Because you went, it's got to be Penguins because of the playoff run. I'm
Yeah,
like, oh damn, he's gonna walk right through this. And then Crosby and Malkin aren't that close.
I wouldn't have guessed Yaga based on the still playing thing.
But he is still playing. He's never retiring. That man is never retiring.
He's not retired.
He's definitely not retired.
That wasn't the question.
Ask him. He'll tell you he's not retired.
Yeah.
So let's get into the episode. And we need to start with we have a trade to announce. I think you're going to want to hear it. This is one of the weirdest trade that came out of absolutely nowhere. Cutter Gauthier was 5th overall in 2022, is traded from Philadelphia to Anaheim for Jamie Drysdale and a 2025 second. Now, this was bizarre for a number of reasons. First of all, there were Anaheim Ducks fans upset that they were losing Jamie Drysdale, who I think were missing out on the far bigger picture of what they just got. But
obviously, Cutter Gauthier is a highly drafted prospect. He went 5th overall in the 2022 draft. That isn't necessarily to guarantee that he's a can't miss, absolutely going to be a gun in the NHL kind of thing. We've seen plenty of players in the top 10 be drafted and not necessarily reach their potential or take many years to get there or whatever. Like, I think that there's a lot of the reaction to this has been like, well, this guy's a future superstar. He's absolutely guaranteed. And of course, he's doing great at the level he's playing at currently. I'm not gonna risk it all and say that, definitely this is the, going to be the future, Sidney Crosby or whatever. I don't think that's what we're talking about. But in terms of the really interesting thing is it's been a while since we've seen someone this high profile refuse to sign an ELC with the team. Like, it's usually a tap in that teams sign their players to ELCs. We see
the Flyers
this player's signed a their entry level contract, and it's that's the minimum of what you're supposed to be able to do.
The Flyers most famously profited from this once.
Since Lindros, this is it's been hilarious to see Flyers fans up in arms about this when they profited from this in the first place.
Yeah, all these people going, I can't believe this happened. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous, and all these people are going, let me tell you about history. Remember that 88 guy that you had? Remember him?
How did you get that guy again?
Got him. Do you know how that happened? Do you remember when you drafted Eric Lindros? Good, because you didn't.
But I can understand the confusion from Flyers fans and stuff, because it sounds like they really, the Flyers really just don't even know exactly what went wrong. There's a lot of rumors that went around, and they haven't really actually been able to talk to him in an official capacity to find out what the reason was.
But this is the really bizarre part of it. So they went to meet with him, and he just refused to take the meeting.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of conversation going on at the moment from a Flyers perspective of people going, we have no idea. And Cutter Gauthier's camp has sort of been leaking out, they know why I wouldn't take the meeting, and you'll find out soon enough why I wouldn't take the meeting. And I'm just looking forward to the new chapter in Anaheim. And it feels like something's got very lost. Either something's got very lost in communication, or the Flyers are lying through their teeth and they know what happened with the breakdown. I suspect it's the latter, that the Flyers know.
I suspect unofficially they have an idea of what's going on.
Look, I don't feel like, regardless of wanting to get out of a situation or not being in a situation, I don't feel like any player in the league is going to just not engage and then that's it. There's no conversation about why, because you run the risk of being blackballed. They did say, though, this was not absolutely recent. Apparently, the Flyers sort of said that they appreciated the fact that he didn't leak out that this had happened while they were trying to negotiate a trade. That everyone kept it quiet while trades were being worked on. And also they thanked Danny Briere took the really unusual step of thanking other general managers for not
because obviously they did shop around and try and get the best possible return.
The Drysdale things it's interesting for me because when we were talking in the preseason, we were talking about the idea that the Drysdale contract they were signing was probably going to be a bridge into seeing where that team was
Mm.
and then working out what that deal looked like for him in the next contract. So it's a really interesting one on that. It's also really interesting because if Katagatya does what he could and what he's projected to do, that middle of the ice for Anaheim in 4 or 5 years, it's going to be really good.
Yeah, I mean, like they have a lot of prospects that, if they all hit at the same time, if they all kind of, I think that there could be that situation that happens to them like what's happened with New Jersey, minus the goaltending issues, but, where all of their prospects kind of, mature at the right time and they kind of hit a stride and take a big step forward. I mean, I've seen a lot of people talking about their depth or whatever, but most of the time they're looking at the roster and they're showing like 90% of the people on this projected future roster are already playing for them right now, and they're still bad. So, I'm not going to guarantee that they're going to be a juggernaut, but I like the fit for them, and I don't know what necessarily Philadelphia thinks that they're getting in Jamie Drysdale, because there was some interesting comments from Tortorella after the trade talking about this guy's like a rover, he's got this untapped like offensive potential and so forth, which hasn't really kind of been what we've seen from him so far in his NHL career. So I don't know whether that's a matter of them, being familiar with the player or not being familiar with the player and trying to talk it up. So I'm curious to see, unfortunately he played like one game and got injured. So, I'm curious to see how he finds a fit there, what his long-term outlook is on the Flyers and what role he ends up slotting into as he develops.
And the other interesting part at the moment for the Ducks as well is that, they're very firmly engaged in the tank war. And especially more now that obviously Trevor Zegras has gone on to IR with the broken ankle. And so Zegras is out currently for about 6 to 8 weeks with that broken ankle. So, look, they're very much Anaheim's very much, like last year they weren't expecting to be terrible, and they were. This year, they were still expecting to be bad, but not horrible. And now with injuries and the way everything else is going about it, they're fully locked into this tank war with San Jose. It's a weird thing. Like, Anaheim's definitely building for the future. Philadelphia get a piece that's technically for now. I'm really intrigued by what Philadelphia looks like going forward, because one of the things that, we know is that traditionally John Tortorella is not one that looks vaguely at the future, doesn't really care about what's happening in the next 5 years, because he's very rarely there for it. So, I'm interested to see a club like Philadelphia that's supposed to be sort of rebuilding, but at the same time, if they can't keep Katagatya, and if there is an issue there in terms of youth development, or they look at youth, maybe he looked at youth pathways and went, don't think Tortorella's going to play me. Is that possibly an issue going forward for Philadelphia as they hit, the draft?
Yeah.
As this is what they're supposed to be looking at is.
Well, the funny thing, I don't know if you saw there was a Philadelphia beat writer that was talking about maybe he got some advice from Kevin Hayes because, apparently they're friends, and, there was this, essentially a rumor that, Hayes told him not to sign with the team because, for whatever reason. And Tortorella pretty much singled out that beat writer in a press interview and said how do you report this or whatever, and basically that this affects these players, and basically went in on him in the interview basically, and the director was like, look, I'm gonna report what people tell me, and
it was weird that Tortorella was so hard on that, just going, how dare you say that about Kevin Hayes? And I'm like, that's interesting, because we know that Tortorella and Hayes hate each other. That's not a secret. So the fact that Tortorella went, that's a crock of shit, how dare you say that about Kevin Hayes? How dare you use that? It was like, that's interesting. I'm assuming that Kevin Hayes was on the phone instantly going, not me. I had nothing to do with it. Don't kill me, Torts. Don't kill me. But the other interesting thing, before we move on, obviously, as you said, then Drysdale gets hurt. The NHL is in the middle of an injury plague.
Yeah.
The number of players, and we're not talking
about significant players too,
Jack Hughes. Bedard, Jack Hughes,
Ovechkin,
all marks day to day at the moment. Jeff Skinner, although not massive.
Some teams are just absolutely riddled with injuries.
Is there anybody playing on? Is there anybody playing on the Blackhawks anymore?
Yeah, not really.
I don't think. I think noted
The
Blackhawks
entirety
fan,
of New Jersey, obviously.
noted Blackhawks fan Jojo. I'm assuming that you get the call up
Yeah,
someday. Get ready, Jojo. You're on.
You already
Where do you
at the start of the season, you looked at that roster, and a lot of names on there were like, "Who the fuck is this guy?" And now it's like top to bottom, "Who the fuck is this guy?"
Yeah, like it's gotten to the point where like legitimately you can't name. If I asked you to name, if I asked you to name the sixth defenseman for
no idea.
There's not a hope. Like, there's not a chance. I couldn't do it. I could not. I could barely name them when I knew when they were supposed to know who they were. Like the Blackhawks have. So, like the Blackhawks, actually, the funny part is the defense are full of people you sort of have heard of.
Yeah.
And a couple of people who are creator players. But so hang on. This is the forward roster.
Yeah.
Currently, Jason Dickinson. Okay. Philip Kurashev, Ryan Donato. I forgot that's where he ended up.
Yeah.
And then Colin Blackwell, Rem Pitlick, Cole Gutman, Lucas Reichel, Mackenzie Entwistle, Reese Johnson, Joey Anderson, Zach Sanford, Boris Kachuk, Taylor Radish. They are all the names of creator players where you take the existing last name of a player.
Largely creator players, for sure.
Rem Pitlick,
Yeah, Rem Pitlick they recently acquired for a seventh. It wasn't worth mentioning in the trade stuff. He was playing in the WBS Penguins of the AHL, and they got him for a seventh. And now Daily Faceoff has him playing on the first line of the Blackhawks.
And as we just pointed out there in the chat, Kurashev was wearing an A.
Oh God,
that's horrific.
Yeah.
Like everybody's injured, and it's mental right now. And the funny part is that one of the healthiest teams in the league at the moment is Toronto, and they're shit. So we'll talk about that in a minute when we get to the what have we learned. But speaking of Toronto, let's get to the signings, because the big signing, obviously, William Nylander, 8 years, 11.5 AAV, which is both a fantastic signing and ridiculous at the same time. Now, it's a fantastic signing because he's worth that. Absolutely 100% would get that on the open market. Absolutely 100% worth it to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Has probably outside of Austin Matthews, who, by the way, very, very quietly is on an absolute goal-scoring heater while his team is terrible. William Nylander has been the best Leaf outside of Austin Matthews by a mile. It's not even close. But that roster sucks. And they've now got all of that money. Now, it's one more year before the Tavares deal comes up. But they've got a lot of money for 1 year when this kicks in, locked into that four with a slight increase to the cap. And a roster that clearly needs work. It's a weird one because it does feel a lot like the reason that Dubas got moved on, apart from the power struggle with Shanahan, was that he finally said that he was going to address the four and maybe make a decision around moving one of them, which is probably going to be Mitch Marner, let's face it, out to make some cap space. And he was immediately let go. And when we get the new general manager walks in the door and immediately signs a bunch of players who don't need them to large contracts by what they're worth, and then does the Nylander extension at 8 by 11.5.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, can you imagine how much Dubas would have been media over
flaming torches
that were made immediately after he left. I don't know. Look, I don't have any problem with the contract in a vacuum, especially considering the percentage of the cap, the fact
I'd have paid him that.
Yeah, exactly. We already know that it's the cap is going up about $4 million next year. The percentage of the cap is essentially makes this equivalent to the Pasternak contract that was signed, a couple of years ago. I think market value wise, it's perfectly acceptable for the player. Toronto's situation, Toronto's problem has never necessarily been any particular contract in a vacuum. It's just the kind of combination of the the situation that they're in. Like, yeah, can you make an argument that having 4 players signed over 10 million is probably not a sustainable model in the NHL? Yeah, probably. It's probably there's just not enough money to go around to really fill out a roster unless you're really smart about it. And they really just haven't shown that they've been able to get those bargains that have made a significant team out of the rest of the roster.
It's also really interesting because I think, like, when people talk about the Toronto media, I think what people misread about the Toronto media is I think the Toronto media are the ones who talk up the price. Like, I think they are the ones who inflate what a player is worth and mean that Toronto have to pay that. Not because they're scared of Toronto. This is the thing that annoys me. You get this narrative. They don't want the heat. They can't take the heat in Toronto. Now, the Toronto media will spend all of their time hyping up how big this player will be for Toronto, and their agent goes, great, we know the fan base wants it. We know the media wants it. We know you listen to the media. We're going to add $1.5 million onto that contract. And that's what happens. And they haven't worked it out yet. And until they work that out, they are going to be stuck in this cycle. I just had a look. Next year, they have $21 million in free space. They don't have a goalie on the roster.
Yeah, which is probably
well, they'll bring Joseph Woll back, but like that's not a solution. No. They lose Tyler Bertuzzi and Max Domi. They've got Nick Robertson as an RFA, although I suspect he's going to get traded any day now because he can't make a lineup with a crappy Leafs team. TJ Brody comes off the books. Timothy Liljegren is an RFA. They've got to pay him. Giordano comes off. They've got to replace all of this.
Yeah,
with $21 million. Like, that is not enough money to replace that.
No, I mean, and look, the reality is that I just don't trust their ability to flesh out the rest of the roster with talent that covers that option, because time and time again we've seen the Leafs, we've seen Edmonton, we've seen other teams like get a situation where they go into an off season and you go, oh, look, they've got 10 million freed up or whatever. This is going to solve all of their problems. And then they just blow it all on one player again, or they target the wrong kind of player and they're exactly back where they were before. Like, let's say theoretically that they went into next season, they found a trade for John Tavares or whatever. Having another $11 million on available, in theory, that cap space is incredibly valuable, and all you can add all of these, players, and you can do all this, whatever, but you still have to go out and actually add valuable players at, an acceptable value to fill out the rest of that roster. And they just haven't proved really that they're capable of.
I don't trust that with extra cap space, the Leafs, for example, wouldn't go to Washington and take Tom Wilson with this idea of, well, he can do what he did for them in their cup run, forgetting how long ago that was now.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
This is the thing. I have no faith that that's not what Toronto would do with the money. I think they would. I think they would 100% go and get Tom Wilson, thinking that's what we need on this roster. And this is the problem, is that the way that the best analogy that was given to me today after watching the NFL playoffs, in many ways this has always been true, but it's really true now. The Toronto Maple Leafs are the Dallas Cowboys. They are 100%. People within the leagues hate them unless they are a fan of that team.
Yeah.
They are overhyped. They are overcovered. And everybody in a preseason looks at that roster and looks at the team up top to bottom and goes, this is their year, this is their time, and the most important phrase, this time it's different. This is never different, and this is not different.
I don't think that this is a problem that's entirely, the Leafs. I think the vast majority of teams in this league, I wouldn't trust that GM to be able to...
No. Because it's all old boys.
Make a significant improvement to their roster going into that. So often we see, teams go into the offseason, make 1 or 2 big signings and kind of go, yep, that's it, my job's done. And you kind of go, this is the same shit as before.
I think the problem in the league is the fact that you've got the same people making the decisions. Toronto really believed that the way to fix their contract hell that they thought they were in was to get the guy from Calgary who put Calgary into absolute contract hell. I could not foresee this happening. Literally, the Flames have been trying to unpick every move that Treliving made at the end because he put all these players on big contracts with $100 hard to move clauses or no move clauses, and just loaded the roster up to the point where they had no flexibility to make these moves and had to go out and make really big moves they didn't necessarily want to make, and then Treliving goes to Toronto and immediately drops the minute. And it's I can't believe that what he did previously, he did again. How dare he?
Yeah. Look, part of this is the cap. Part of this is the actual, financial situation of the league. Like you look at other sports with, significant, cap increases each year and the kind of movement that they get and the kind of interest in moves that actually happen there. Like the NHL just isn't a league where, huge turnover happens to teams on a regular basis. So it's always going to be nickel and dime.
But here's the other thing too. If, for example, the league did a hard reset like it did on the last lockout, gave teams buyouts to fix all their problems and make them all go away, do you trust the league to do that?
No, they'd be back in exactly the same position in 3 years.
Instantly released with buyout John Tavares' contract in a heartbeat, and someone else would pay Tavares $11 million.
Yeah, and then they just move the problem from one place to another.
Move the problem to someone else. So to go through the rest of the signings that have happened, Nathan Walker didn't get $11 million, but 2 more years at $7.75. Look, he hangs in there.
Look, I think every time I watch him, I think he's noticeable. Like he's impressive at the the NHL level in the role that he's given, which is usually a depth role. I don't know what he has to do to stick on an NHL roster. Like at this point in his career, like I feel like if he doesn't do it during this contract, that could be it. Like he gets a good call up and plays like 4 or 5 games or whatever a season. And I'm like, I don't know. I just kind of wish that, look, you can't tell me that he wouldn't be, playing 82 games on the Chicago Blackhawks roster right now.
Oh, right now, he would be getting so much time. He'd be getting time in San Jose. He'd be getting time in Chicago. The fact that, look, he's been let go of teams, and then they've reclaimed him again when he pops back up on waivers. He's popular.
They clearly like him. They just don't have a full-time roster spot for him.
Yeah, he's popular within a locker room. He does a job, and he does that job without complaining and just seems to just get on with it. And he doesn't cost a lot of money. Stormy's done really well, but I think this could be the last one. Maybe one more after this.
Well, he'll be 32 at the end of this contract, so it's
Oh, look, at this point in time, he's due for $2 million in Toronto, so it's all good.
That's true.
Nick Foligno, 2 years at 4.5 in Chicago because they've got to pay somebody to play hockey in Chicago. And
it really feels like a character signing to me. It really feels like we need some adult.
And immediately broke his finger. And immediately broke his finger. That went well. And Ethan Bear, 2 years.
Was it signing the contract? Did he break it signing the contract?
I'm assuming so. Especially with Foligno's recent injury history has very much weird injuries. And Ethan Bear, 2 years at 2.0525.
It's a bizarre number because it's like it makes it like 4 point, something.
It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And look, I wasn't necessarily convinced that Ethan Bear was going to get a contract. So
I'm a little surprised it took this long, to be honest. I think that there's a few players that kind of just missed out on the hot seat, kind of the musical chairs of the off season, and he was kind of one of those guys that I thought probably should have been on a team and would have been if some teams didn't already have contracts signed. But they just couldn't move anyone out to make it work, and they found a way to make that work. So I'm glad that he's back in the NHL.
Yeah, I think it's good for him, obviously. But I was wondering if that was going to happen, or I felt that he might. At one point, I actually thought he might get moved at the deadline. I was like, they might move him. Just someone claims him. To move on, the World Juniors happened, as we know from the NHL, from the Facebook page where everyone was asking where we can watch them.
Yeah. Just daily.
Yeah. So what channel? Why is KO not showing the World Juniors? KO doesn't show the NHL. You think he's showing the World Juniors?
Every year, people think for the first time ever, they're like, hey, does Australian TV show, the fucking world, a bunch of under 18s playing hockey in somewhere in a weird time slot?
Got
Like,
news
come
for
on,
you.
bro.
Only
Never.
Canada shows the World Juniors.
Yeah.
Maybe Sweden. Maybe.
Yeah,
I mean,
the countries that have a chance of winning it, like
Canada shows the World Juniors, and basically so that the entire nation can lambast a group of kids when they don't win. Which is what happened in this one.
Yeah, unfortunately, they didn't make it particularly far. I mean, their team didn't look the best.
This year was not. They were not a good lineup, and they weren't a good lineup when the Canadian media was saying on the way in they're not going to do anything this year.
Yeah.
Like, there was no hype for Team Canada.
Well, it's going to be a little bit of a theme over the last few years that you've really kind of seen there used to be like stacked Team Canada teams that were just like a shoe-in to win from the start, and then it's just we've kind of seen this power shift towards the USA, towards Sweden. Czechia's been having a little bit of a resurgence. Some teams that are actually become real kind of viable contenders, which is incredible to see, because it used to just kind of be like, oh, well, all right, well, you're going to watch the World Juniors just to see Canada win again. Like, it hasn't been that for a few years now. I
mean, look, the only reason for me to vaguely pay attention to the World Juniors is that my future favourite player was playing for Canada. So, and look, Macklin Celebrini did okay. 8 points, 4 goals, 4 assists.
Yeah, what else can you do?
He's going to look beautiful in teal. It's going to be wonderful when he might be. He's a Canucks fan, so that's going to be really disappointing for him when he has to go and own them all year by playing in the Pacific for the San Jose Sharks when we draft him first overall. Look, I need something when we get to the end and we talk about the whole year, what we've learned so far. I need something. What has actually happened though, which has been really good, the PWHL.
Yeah.
So it's available on YouTube. Just for everybody who's wondering, where can you watch it? YouTube is the answer. Every game is there. And
I think it's a really smart move for them, especially just in the first year of the league. Like, rather than trying to set up a paywall and trying to charge for it from the beginning, getting that level of interest from the start. People that are interested in women's hockey to people that are just wanting more hockey to watch and
get eyes on the product and get eyes on the product, get people engaged, get people wanting to watch it. And if you give it to people for free and let them watch it, you're going to get the average trolls in the comments who are going to make all sorts of comments. But if you've actually watched any of the games, I have. I watched the New York Minnesota game, the most recent game. Minnesota, by the way, was undefeated right up until the most recent game where New York beat them in overtime. And when New York beat them in overtime, I think the shots count was 34-18 in favor of Minnesota. And New York managed to scrape it into overtime and then managed to, with a minute left in overtime, score the winner. But it was great hockey. It was absolute end-to-end stuff. They're playing some really good hockey. And we had the record attendance for professional women's hockey broken twice in 2 days. The first game drew 8,500, which was a record, and then Minnesota drew 13,316, which was more than the average attendance last season of San Jose and the Jets. The crowd was rocking. It was a great time.
Yeah.
I highly recommend if you haven't watched it, the PWHL YouTube page is there. Go and you can click on any game. The whole thing's there. It's time stamped with goals if you just want to watch highlights or whatever happened. But all of the games are there, and you can go and rewatch them. And I highly recommend it. It's good fun.
Yeah. The only disappointment for me at this stage is that the teams don't have like real names at this point.
That's the only issue is that there's no real names there.
It's not really important, but I feel like it gives some personality. I like that they didn't rush into it. I like that they didn't try and go, oh shit, we've got to have this done in 2 months. Let's just give them whatever names and hope for the best.
The jerseys are fine. Like, they're not spectacular, but let's face it, they're a lot better than the All-Stars, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, the location is the important part. It's fine. It's enough that's there, but I'd like to see how that develops in terms of
For me,
the personalities of those teams and getting people in and stuff. Like for me, as a neutral fan with like no team that necessarily matches up to like generally if there was a if you're a Penguins fan or whatever, if there's a Pittsburgh team, you would probably go for the Pittsburgh team even if you're not a local. But I'm kind of a somewhat of a neutral fan to that, and I just kind of haven't really seen enough of the teams and the personalities and stuff for me to kind of pick a team and go, oh yeah, that's the one that I want to follow.
My selling point for people, if you need a selling point as to why you should watch this, you get to watch Marie-Philippe Poulin play regularly, like in a league. Yeah. And in her first game, she scored, and it wasn't a tap-in. It was a MPP, one end of the rink to the other, knocks the puck out wide, skates through the middle, gets it back, give and go, straight. Yeah, it was an MPP goal. And I highly recommend, if you've got the chance to go and watch Marie-Philippe Poulin play, do it. So, like 100%, it is worth it, and I would get all over the PWHL. It's free hockey, guys. It's free hockey. You're all complaining that hockey costs you a fortune to watch, and it's really hard to watch, and you don't like all the streaming options. This is free. It's on YouTube.
And the women's game is great. Like the style and the way that they play, it's pretty great. But I need to check it out a little bit more. I'm holding off on my team pick at this point in time. My default would probably I was following the New York Riveters back when the previous version of the league.
Well, they had the best jerseys.
Yeah, so that was kind of it from the beginning. But I'm probably holding off until I see a cool jersey.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. So you might be holding off for a little bit on that one, but
so I'll just watch everything for now.
Yeah, it's good. It's good fun to watch anyway. Speaking of jerseys and All-Stars, let's talk about the All-Star game, shall we? And we've got the rosters, so I'm just going to give us the rosters because I think that's important. Because there's some interesting names going on here. Hang on a minute.
I mean, look, I feel like that's always the case with the All-Star stuff. Like, I can't get myself too upset about All-Star anymore.
I can't be too upset about it. But my question is, like they could only it was one from each team, and then you get the extras all voted in. Okay, fair enough, good. As a Sharks fan, I'm staggered that Thomas Hertl made it, and it wasn't Mackenzie Blackwood, who is by far and away the best Sharks player this season. It's not close.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of question marks around like the one player that got picked from each team. Like there's some interesting ones. Like the one that stands out to me is Boone Jenner in Columbus. Of all of the names on Columbus, look, I know that they're not doing great. I know that Johnny Gaudreau is not necessarily the Johnny Gaudreau that he was in Calgary or whatever in Columbus, but Boone Jenner, like that's it. That's your All-Star.
That was your decision. The decision was Boone Jenner. But I thought, look, I think you can't get upset really about the rosters. I would just say though, I'm not particularly impressed that it was Hertl over Blackwood. I think Mackenzie Blackwood deserves to be an All-Star this year. Like, I think his performance in San Jose has been out of this world, and you literally couldn't ask for a player to do more for a team that's that bad. Yeah. Like in the game yesterday when they went down in the last 3 seconds to Ottawa, Mackenzie Blackwood wasn't just standing on his head; he was basically skating on it. Like he was upside down the whole game, like juggling and like still keeping them out. Like and. The end, there was a slight deflection off him, and there was there was a bounce off Blackwood, and I'm like, how dare you besmirch that? Like, this man's made more saves I would love to. I haven't looked at the stats this year. I can't imagine there's a goalie that's made more saves this year than Mackenzie Blackwood. I cannot imagine there's anyone.
Probably not. Some of it's a volume thing. There are some real workhorses, but there's probably a very good chance. I'll see if I can find it, but. The thing for me too is like there's always the question of how many of those guys end up being either injured or injured with quotation marks when the weekend rolls around. Like there's already several names on that roster like Connor Bedard, Jack Eichel, a handful of players, Jack Hughes and stuff that have had injury problems or are still injured. I wonder how many from this list just don't turn up.
I think there's going to be a bunch of players who are just going to go, nah, I can't be bothered really.
Actually, I would rather the weekend off. Yeah, that's
You
the
know.
thing. Like, that's why I'm not really upset that there isn't more than just Sidney Crosby going for the Penguins, because I'm like, no, I think the rest of those guys probably need a break.
Now, one of the reasons why you might get people who decide that they're going to not go could be something as simple as how bad the jerseys are. So I think we need
So
to
quickly before we talk about the jerseys, because I know this is going to lead us off on a track. Mackenzie Blackwood is pretty high up in terms of total saves, but he's not in the top 5.
Well, this is something too. I was looking at the expected goals against, and like he's not in the top part of that, and I'm like, how many do you think San Jose are going to concede? Like, seriously, he's making 30-odd saves a game.
But I mean, like, he's in good company. Like, he's behind, Sorokin, Georgiev, Demko, Saros, Bennington, Hellebuck, and then Blackwood. So, workhorse starters.
Look, San Jose should be able to get something fairly decent for him at the deadline. Just saying. Hello, Toronto. Would you like a Mackenzie Blackwood? I think you probably would. I'm actually becoming more and more convinced that might be the thing.
All right, let's talk about these jerseys, because, like, honestly, to me, my first reaction to these is: do you remember in like the 90s, early 90s or whatever, like Kmart and Target would have those like jumpers where they would have like designs on the front with like, it's like a cartoon dog playing roller hockey or something like that. It just reminds me of that art style where, it's very childish.
See, for me, it looks like the star that used to surround your player on the early NHL games was put on.
Which is cool. And so the thing for me though is that I think that this will probably actually look decent on the ice. As much as I think it looks.
Nobody's buying these to wear.
Yeah.
But I think they'll look fine on the ice.
Yeah, I think, there's a different situation once you've got that on with gear and you're, there's a whole bunch of you on the ice or whatever. They're like really bright colors. They're really, eye-catching and so forth.
Distinct.
But, they look, I wouldn't wear one because it looks like I'm trying to be a cool dude, but like I think it will look good on the ice. You know what I mean? Like it will actually look good.
It looks like I'm trying to be a cool dude.
Like
hello, fellow children.
It's very hello, fellow kids. Like if there's no way that anyone can that isn't under 25 or whatever can wear this and complete.
It's not a Team North America jersey. Right? It's not a Team North America jersey. Like they flew off the shelves. I suspect they might be giving these away.
There's nothing mature about this design. That's for sure.
No, it's I like the way they're like, designed by Justin Bieber. Now he owns the company. He owns the company. And they will do a blitz of media, and you will have a bunch of people in media suddenly probably a bunch of influencers suddenly telling you these jerseys are actually really cool, and you just haven't worked it out yet. And that's what's going to happen, is they're going to do this great revisionism where they're going to tell you that they're fantastic. And you're the one who's out of touch. The children who are wrong. But yeah, they're not designed to be worn, which is funny because the reason for an all-star jersey is supposed to be sales, really.
Yeah. They
are the least marketable jerseys known to man. So I suspect the NHL will possibly lose money on the jerseys, which...
I mean, there's very rarely been good all-star jerseys, I've got to say. Like,
no, they're not great. Like, everyone forgets the early 90s ones, which were not brilliant.
No,
and they
remind me a bit of those early 90s ones.
They get a revisionism, like the ones with the top half coloured and the bottom half white with the star. Yeah, and they've got a revisionism going about them where people talk about how amazing they were. And no, they were not. But everyone now revises and goes, oh, they were great jerseys. It's like, not really. Not really. All right, we're at the halfway point of the league. So we kind of need to work out what we think's going on and what have we picked up about this league. The first thing I've picked up just from my perspective is that the Colorado Avalanche are really good at hockey. They're really good at hockey. And nobody's brilliant in this league. but they're pretty good at hockey.
Yeah, there's been some interesting, teams on streets and stuff. We've seen obviously, a kind of out of nowhere streak of.
That's okay. The Oilers are now the second coming. Don't panic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, basically, like, I mean, look, it is a PDO bender. The Vancouver Canucks are on, an insane, like, historically.
And they still haven't regressed.
But the reality is that, like, statistically, there's nothing about being successful for some period of time that guarantees that you're going to fall off in a week or a month or a year. Like, they're putting up incredibly unsustainable numbers. At some point in time,
it'll stop.
We return to normal, but it might be next season. It might be in a week. We just don't know, and they're fun right now. Like, watching them play the other day, like, they're playing with confidence. A lot of things are going right for them. Eventually, that will probably stop happening. But right now, like, enjoy it. Like, it's been a long time since Vancouver was, leading anything, and it's nice to kind of see them have some success.
It's been really good to watch Vancouver, and I know Vancouver fans are slightly panicky about what's going on. What I'm learning about. I'll get Edmonton out of the way. What I'm learning about Edmonton is that the Oilers are very good on beating up on terrible teams, which they've finally hit. So the change in management has happened around from the 25th of November. They played the Caps, the Ducks. They did beat Vegas 5-4 in a shootout. And they beat the Jets, and the Jets have been decent. And then the Hurricanes. But after that, they've gone wild. Blackhawks, Panthers, they lost to the Panthers. They lost to the Islanders. Then they went on their run with the Devils and the Rangers. The Rangers have been all over the place, but that was the Christmas game. You never take that into account. Then Sharks, Kings, Ducks, Flyers, Senators, Blackhawks, Red Wings, Habs. Like, they're like, oh, they're on a hot streak. Of course they are. Have you seen who they're playing?
Yeah.
Like, they're playing.
That wasn't a guarantee for them at the start of the year, to be honest. But
yeah, I would be disappointed if, even under the previous management, if they were losing this run of games at this point.
Well, this is the thing. Like, this is more what I expected from them at the start of the year. Like, they were doing historically badly. Their goaltending was doing historically badly, and they were, not scoring at the same rate that they were previously. And things have kind of, righted to a point, which will generally happen over the course of a period of time. I think that we're starting to see some things even out. Like, we're starting to see some of the trends from the start of the season start to balance themselves. There are still a few kind of outliers, but teams that were, the last time we talked, the Washington Capitals were like third in the Metro or whatever. Now they're, right near the bottom. There are teams that were on, kind of runs that weren't particularly sustainable that are starting to kind of even out. The Metro was still weird because there's still like literally 2 points between fourth and seventh. So there's a lot of juggling that can happen there that, you can't necessarily look at that and kind of go, oh, well, you're at the bottom of that barrel, so therefore you're bad. Then you win one game, all of a sudden you're back in the playoffs again. But I don't know. It's there's still a lot of mushy middle, but it's kind of nice to kind of see some of the expected things that were looking kind of shifty at the start of the season start to kind of balance out. Like, some teams are returning back to their level, but I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked to see some of these teams like Winnipeg, like Vancouver, that have put so much runway ahead of them, make a little bit of a run. I don't trust either of those teams to win a playoff series.
I don't trust.
To see them try.
My thing at the moment is I'm trying to work out who I actually trust at the moment in the league.
Yeah,
and I don't trust the Jets to win a series. Like, the Jets and the Avalanche in the last 10 have the exact same record, 8-1-1. I trust one of those two teams in a playoff series. It's not Winnipeg. Like, Dallas has just been going about their business in the Central and just sort of hanging in there, and they're just off the shoulder. They're perfectly fine. The Preds have done what I thought they'd do at the start of the season and sort of hung on for dear life in that middle. But that's also because the Blues weren't particularly great, but the Blues have gotten better since they've made their coaching change. The Coyotes are sort of just sticking around. They're not consistent enough probably, but you wouldn't expect them to. The Wild have been disappointing. The Wild have been one of the more disappointing teams in the league this year. I've not been impressed by much that they've done. The Kraken have regressed a little bit to where we thought the Kraken would regress to in their first season. San Jose is abject, absolutely abject, and I'm loving it because bring on those early picks. But I think for me, and it's not. We talk about the Leafs a lot, but we kind of have to talk about it again. We mentioned at the start they're third in the Atlantic. They've got a game in hand on the two teams in front of them. I reckon that the Leafs are a shout to miss the playoffs, and it's the vibe around the team at the moment is not great. They lost today to a Detroit team that barely turned up at the arena.
Yeah,
literally,
they've had a couple where they've lost they've been leading and
they've collapsed. Austin Matthews is on an absolute heater and still has an outside chance. He probably won't get there, but an outside chance of 50 goals in 50 games. He's not unbelievably far away, given that he tends to score in bunches. He has an outside shot at it. I think he's on 33 and 39 or something like that. He gets a couple of hatties, which it's Matthews, so yeah, he's in a shout. But there's something not right. I think Sheldon Keefe might be fired before we get to February because they've got to do something. And if Sheldon Keefe may not make the All-Star break in Toronto if this keeps going, because the Red Wings have been good, and a phrase that Toronto fans will not want to hear, Tampa is working it out. And Tampa has been decent. They're on a 3-game win streak. They're 6-4-0 in their last 10. Tampa is working it out. And if you've got the Red Wings putting pressure on Toronto and Tampa looks like they're going to work it out, I'd trust Tampa at the tail end of the season because we know they can do that. And this might also be the Stamkos last run thing. So if I'm Toronto, I'm probably quietly shitting myself.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a difficult wildcard race as well. There are so many teams around that same point. Like, you look top and bottom through the league, and there are so few teams that have a losing record. Yep. Like, in some divisions, there's like one team at most that actually is under 500. There is such a small gap between the vast majority of teams that you can be 4 points between. There's a difference between being in one of the wild cards and being out of the playoff picture, or being in third in the division and being out of the playoff picture.
23 points, baby. 23 points.
Yeah, it's a tough league to there's a lot of just okay teams this year. I think that's kind of the message, really. I haven't seen a lot of teams that have kind of put themselves head and shoulder above the rest and said, like, we're the team to be.
Like my thing is, like, and we've talked a lot over the years about the idea of trusting teams when they get into a big spot. I trust the Avalanche when they get in a big spot. I kind of now trust Vegas in a big spot, obviously, because they've proven they can do that. I don't trust the Oilers. I don't trust the Jets. I kind of trust the Stars in the West. In the East, I kind of trust the Bruins, but not even that. I'm not even that committed. I barely trust anyone in the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And I think probably the Hurricanes in the Metro. I don't even know if I trust the Rangers that much.
Yeah.
They've been good, but they're a bit wobbly. And
yeah, I mean, well, you're finally getting your wish to see Tony Panarin go on a goal scoring spree.
It's finally happened. At least that's happened.
Is that gonna sustain? Is that gonna stay happening, or he's on a heater right now?
Look, they need him to be, because the Rangers haven't been brilliant in their last 10. They've sort of they had a big gap and they've come back to the pack in a very, like, the Hurricanes have been on an absolute
some teams have caught up, that's for sure.
Yeah, the Flyers refuse to go away despite every bit of evidence to the contrary suggesting they probably should.
Yeah.
I don't understand what's going on with Philadelphia. I can't work it out. Because they're not great. And when you watch them,
no, I don't. Yeah, they've won a lot of like 1-goal games. They've won a lot of, like, somehow they edged out a win. That's Tortorella hockey, I guess. Whether or not that translates to any kind of real success is another question. But they're playing Columbus Blue Jackets hockey really, or
And-
New York Islanders hockey. That's kind of what it is.
And the Penguins are lurking.
Yeah.
Like, I think the Penguins have sort of had a quietly decent bounce back from their start.
Well, they've really ridden a very good season from Sidney Crosby. He's really kind of pulled them.
Crosby's been great.
Stolen a lot of points for a very kind of renaissance performance for Sidney Crosby. They're still I think they still have depth issues, but they're starting to work it out. Some of the depth players that were abysmal towards the start of the season are kind of starting to be serviceable, which is a big thing for them. It's a tough hole to dig yourself back out of, though, because they'll piece together like 3 or 4 wins in a row and only really kind of gain like one position in the standings. It's just it's a difficult league to gain points on other teams in your division. But
like Crosby's work this year, like he's got 24 goals. Like he's playing really well, and he is largely that offense at the moment. Like Matthews has got 33 at the moment, with second place Sam Reinhart, which we all saw coming.
Yeah.
But and in the goaltending stats, and I've got to mention it because it got mentioned in the NHL NHL Facebook page today, and if I don't mention this, the 3 or 4 Kraken fans will come at me. Joey Daccord,
yeah,
has been really good.
Oh yeah,
and that's not something that I think anyone anticipated this season. It's like Martin Jones being good for the Leafs. Like, who saw that coming? Who saw Charlie Lindgren being outstanding in Washington right now? Like, it's really there's a lot of weird little storylines flowing through the league, which there always are.
Yeah.
The other interesting part that came out, I don't know if you saw another Rachel Dory classic, which was talking about when Rachel Dory commented on Bruce Boudreau's story on the panel on the weekend. Where he said that somebody inside the organization demanded that Quinn Hughes get moved to center.
That's an interesting one. I wouldn't mind seeing Quinn Hughes play center. I don't know if I would be the one that would do it, but I think that he's got the skill set potentially.
I have a feeling. I have a feeling, given the Rachel Dory's history, where she was like, "I know who that person was," and it was blah 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 blah. Didn't name them, but I think most people, if you've paid any attention to the Rachel Dory Canucks stuff, you can probably put 2 and 2 together and come up with Emily Castengay. Probably, it's probably a pretty good bet there. But I wouldn't mind seeing him at center. I think it's a really silly idea to just go put him at center. It's got to be happening. It's like he's doing very well where he is. And to finish off, I do want to discuss something. The last thing I want to mention before we finish up is over the weekend, because a lot of people in the group obviously listen to the Steve Dangle podcast. And I did want to bring up before we finished up, over the weekend, SDPN laid off all of their Game Over hosts on the weekend. All of their Game Over hosts and their basketball show host as well. And immediately cancelled all of them as part of a restructuring, basically costs blowing out. And it's a disappointing thing for, I think, NHL media. We still traditionally, I think a lot about that traditional media. Like in Canada, you think about TSN and Sportsnet, obviously, with hockey, and like ESPN and TNT in the States. But these sort of organizations, these little things that pop up, have kind of taken a large percentage of the views and a large percentage of that narrative over. And it's not a great day when organizations like that have to suddenly lay off a bunch of people. My read on that is that it was a startup that decided to rapidly accelerate far too soon.
Yeah, that's the impression that I got. It was, all of a sudden they went from like, hey, we've decided we're all quitting our jobs and we're doing this full time. We're turning this into a business, and we're gonna make this work. And like, oh, hey, we can make a whole fleet of these. We can have this for every market. We can do all these kind of things. And I think that they just expanded too quickly. They had, that excitement of turning this into something, and maybe just didn't really have like a solid idea of how that was going to get paid, how the money was going to coming for that.
And from what I've been able to make out, some people are saying $50. I think most people are saying it was about $100 an episode for contributors, so it's not nothing. And it's also really tricky as well because Andrew Berkshire, who was put in charge of setting up the game overs, he tweeted out at the end of after it all happened, and first of all he was like, "Don't have a go at them. They've done a lot more for people being laid off than a lot of organisations I've worked for. They're really doing a lot behind the scenes you can't see, so that's really good, and that's great, fantastic, well done." But his other point that he made was, when I was given the brief to start it up, I was told, "Don't worry about cost. We're worried about content." Then they shut it down because of cost. And as he said, if they'd given me a brief that it had to be a make profit for them, we would have set it up differently. And I just think, again, it's rather than being a negative story about them, and I don't think it's a negative story about them, I think it's a cautionary tale about rushing into any form of business decision. And startups happen all the time. And look, big media, independent media have had this happen. John Boy, for example, who's one of the largest independent media for sports in the world, who does all the baseball. John Boy Media 12 months ago had to lay off a bunch of people because they expanded too fast and had to contract it back down. But now are highly profitable because they caught it early and they fixed it up early. And the thing I hope is that this is them getting in front of it and going, we don't want to do this, letting Game Over maybe go for the rest of the season and putting the whole business in jeopardy. If we do this now, we can probably steady the ship. And then if we do expand later on, we can make better decisions as to how we do that. My last point on that is really interesting, is that I'm amazed they haven't gone to a Patreon or a YouTube membership.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one.
Most media now is doing that. Even big YouTube channels like Smosh, for example.
Yeah.
Relaunched with, Anthony Padilla going back to their company, and you've got Anthony Padilla and Ann Hecox running it again. And immediately they moved to a not ultra expensive membership tiered system on YouTube to help fund independent media production. And I'm surprised they haven't done that. Like they're doing it purely for advertising.
Yeah, I think that, they're, especially with the kind of community that they have, the kind of following amongst, loyal, people that have been watching for a long time, I think that probably would work for them in terms of, I think the only difficult thing is they're producing so much content, like several episodes a week, that, a lot of that format is we'll do an extra show, or we'll do, something or whatever for people that sign up or whatever. I don't know what more content that they could make at this point, but.
Well, I think what they could do, for example, is Jesse does the roster rebuilds and stuff like that on NHL, and they were using Twitch, and then they've stopped going with the Twitch idea, and what I think they could do with that is that could be a members thing where they do a member stream of that, or a member stream of the other things. They've got other studios. They've literally got 3 studios in their building. So they could do that as a small thing instead. I think the other thing, before we finish up on this, the other thing with that is that it's also a bit of a message about separating out your content, because they only have the one channel and everything appears on the one channel. And if you've ever tried to navigate their YouTube page, it's a mess. Because there's all of the game overs, and then there's clips of the game overs. That's the other thing they didn't do, which I thought was surprising, and it's the last point on it, is there was no integration. Unless you watched those game overs, you didn't know who the hosts were.
Yeah.
And they could have done segments, and this is something that's been brought up a lot. They often, especially Adam Wild, fly off the handle and talk about, teams with absolutely no knowledge of that team, and make a bunch of wild statements that they don't actually understand that team. They've had all the game over hosts. When you're talking about Calgary, why don't you get the game over Calgary hosts on to talk about what's happening in Calgary? You've got them on the payroll. Why don't you get the Edmonton host to come in and talk about the Oilers when the Oilers are happening, right? If you've got these different franchise people under your pay, why don't you bring them in when you're talking about the content? That could have cross-promoted everything. It's just really simple, and I think that's shows you how rushed that was. So hopefully it all steadies out, and because again, I think it's really good to have that independent media, and I think it's obviously we think it's a great thing, and it's important that sort of stuff does succeed, and everyone I think roots for it. I don't know, regardless of how much you like or hate the Leafs, there aren't many people, and they don't like Dangle because he yells. But if like Steve Dangle, the person, everyone I know who like has ever watched him goes, as a person, I really like him.
Yeah.
It, maybe not the persona, but if you watch it, and so you root for him to succeed. Like, and I just have to say, his face at the end of the podcast and his statement at the end of their most recent podcast wasn't great. And you could tell but you could also tell he was broken, and having to lay people off was not something he was vaguely comfortable with. But hopefully it works out. I really do hope. And I mean, it's important to mention it too, because we know that there are a lot of people in the group who listen to the Dangle podcast.
Yeah.
One of the better ones out there. And with that, we'll leave it for now. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you everyone for listening. Share us around. Remember, we're on YouTube as well, so share us around with people if you want to go, hey, what are these idiots talking about? Let us know. If you watch it afterwards or you listen afterwards, let us know in the comments. We didn't even mention the fact that Connor Bedard is broken. We sort of vaguely mentioned it, but Connor Bedard is currently broken. So, look, it's probably a good thing for him now. He's had his NHL experience. He'll win Rookie of the Year, and he can now not be near the train wreck that is the Blackhawks.
I mean, well, we kind of saw that with the first year of Connor McDavid too. So it's just following tradition, really.
Last thing we'll finish up with one word answer: yes or no. Is Toronto stupid enough to sign Corey Perry?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my point too. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching and listening, and we'll catch you all later.
See ya.